Everything you have been told about building a powerful body follows the same logic. Eat more, train harder, fuel the performance. And if you have been following that logic, you have been building the wrong body. Because what you've been building is a body that only works under perfect conditions. The kind that collapses when food is unavailable, when conditions are hostile, and when the situation demands something your gym never prepared you for. But the Greeks, they built the exact opposite. Take the Spartans, who famously held the pass at Thermopylae with 300 warriors against an army of 100,000, and they did it while only having eaten one modest meal the night before. By every modern standard of nutrition science, they should have been depleted, weak, and incapable of sustaining elite physical performance. Instead, they held that pass for 3 days. And the bodies they built doing it, lean, explosive, functionally indestructible, are still the physical standard the entire Western world measures itself against 2,500 years later. This video is about the biological system that made that possible. A civilization that built the most celebrated warrior physiques on almost no food. And one part of what that system produced directly contradicts something most people in the fitness space, including this channel, have told you before. Subscribe and stay to the end. Because when you understand it, the way you think about every morning you train changes permanently. But before we get to the biology, we need to understand the system that produced it. Because the Spartan body was not an accident of culture or genetics. It was the deliberate output of the most precisely engineered human conditioning program the ancient world ever documented. And the feature that separated it from everything else was not the training. It was the hunger. At age 7, every male Spartan citizen was placed into the agoge, the state conditioning program documented in precise detail by Plutarch and Xenophon. Boys trained twice daily, running, wrestling, weapons drills, endurance work across the valley of the Eurotas River. But the feature that separated the agoge from every other training system in the ancient world was not the training itself. It was the deliberate absence of food. Xenophon writes it plainly. The food allowance was set so that boys would know what it was to go with their hunger, unsatisfied. Plutarch confirms the purpose was equally explicit, to accustom boys to hunger so that hunger could never stop them. So it was not deprivation. It was engineering. Every morning, those boys trained before eating. When they became adult citizens, the same structure continued through the syssitia, the daily communal meal system that required every Spartan male to eat one modest evening meal, by law, for life. No breakfast, no lunch. One meal, in the evening, after everything else was already done. Here is what that pattern was doing to their bodies. When you train in a fasted state, your body produces growth hormone at significantly higher levels than after eating. Growth hormone does two things simultaneously. It uses stored fat as energy and protects lean muscle from being broken down as fuel. The muscle stays, the fat depletes. Body composition shifts, not through eating less, but through the specific hormonal response that the fasted training window triggers every single morning. The Spartan body was being shaped by this mechanism daily, without any Greek physician knowing what growth hormone was. Insulin adds a second layer. In the fasted state, insulin is low. Low insulin means the body cannot store fat. It must access and burn what it has already accumulated. Every pre-dawn training session in the agoge was a fat mobilization session by structural default. And then there is autophagy, a cellular process that earned a Nobel Prize in 2016 when scientists finally understood it fully. Cells under fasting and physical stress break down and recycle their own damaged components. A body that trains fasted consistently over years does not just burn fat. It rebuilds its own tissue from the cleared material. It is cleaner, denser, and structurally superior to tissue built only from dietary protein. The lean, dense physique visible in every surviving depiction of Spartan warriors was the biological output of a fasting pattern that triggered every mechanism the male body has for building lean functional mass. Not the goal, the result. But lean doesn't automatically mean strong. What fasting was doing to Spartan functional performance in direct combat operated through a completely separate mechanism. That mechanism explains why 300 men could rotate in and out of a front line for hours against opponents who vastly outnumbered them, and why their output did not degrade while their enemies did. And it starts with a concept that most people in modern fitness have never been taught. The Spartans who fought at Thermopylae were not the largest men in the ancient world. They were the most functionally capable. And the difference between those two things is built over years of training in a fasted state. The concept that researchers now call metabolic flexibility is the body's ability to switch efficiently between glucose and fat as fuel. Most modern people train after only a few hours without food, not long enough to deplete glucose stores, not long enough to force the body to access fat as its primary fuel. The metabolism never genuinely adapts because it never genuinely has to. A body that trains after 16 or more hours without food, consistently, daily, across years, builds a fundamentally different capacity. It learns to access stored fat efficiently because it has no other option. It becomes independent of a fuel source. In battle, where food can be unavailable for an entire day, that soldier maintains output, while his opponent, whose metabolism never learned to function without supply, physically deteriorates. Fasting is also what biologists call a hormetic stressor, a mild repeated pressure that, rather than weakening the body, forces upward adaptation. It is the same principle behind resistance training and cold exposure. Daily caloric restriction while training forces the body to produce more output with less input. It becomes more efficient per unit of fuel and more capable under resource scarcity, which is precisely the condition of real warfare. This is why the Spartan inspection system mattered. Plutarch documents that adult Spartan men underwent regular physical assessments throughout their lives. A man who had visibly softened faced formal public consequences. The standard being maintained was not aesthetic. It was functional. The demonstrated ability to perform regardless of supply conditions. A body that could only perform when fully fed was a liability. A body that performed regardless was a weapon. The fasting pattern built that second kind of body by default. Physique and performance capacity were not separate outputs. They were the same mechanism running simultaneously through every morning training session for an entire adult lifetime. But there is a third output that fasting was producing, and it had nothing to do with the body at all. What hunger was doing to the Spartan mind in the hours before combat is what no opponent who faced them ever fully understood. And modern neuroscience can now explain exactly what it was. When the body has not eaten, something very specific happens to the brain. Norepinephrine rises. Norepinephrine is the neurotransmitter most directly associated with alertness, focused aggression, and physical readiness. It is the same chemical that sharpens attention in a moment of genuine danger. Short-term fasting elevates it measurably, and the body, detecting that food has not arrived, shifts into its highest output mode. Threat perception sharpens. Reaction time improves. Physical aggression increases. A Spartan warrior moving toward battle in a fasted state was neurologically primed by his own hunger, in a way that a fed opponent simply was not. The second mechanism is ketone production. During extended fasting, the liver produces ketones as an alternative fuel source for the brain. Research links ketone availability to increases in BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the protein that strengthens neural connections and improves cognitive performance under physical stress. A fasted brain is running on a cleaner, more efficient fuel than glucose. Pattern recognition improves. Decision-making under pressure sharpens, and the mental performance that combat demands is actually enhanced, not degraded, by the fasted state. The Greeks had a word for the specific mental condition fasting was producing: thumos. It is the spirited, competitive, physically aggressive dimension of the human soul, distinct from both reason and appetite. Modern neuroscience would locate it in the norepinephrine and cortisol systems. The Spartans cultivated it deliberately through hunger, competition, and physical hardship from childhood. Every morning they trained hungry. They were conditioning not just their bodies, but this precise mental state, the aggressive readiness that made them genuinely dangerous. But this is also where the most important and misunderstood piece of the Spartan system arrives. And it directly contradicts something this channel has said before. In a previous video on this channel, I told you that high cortisol is testosterone's direct enemy. That elevated cortisol suppresses testosterone, drives fat storage, and undermines physical recovery. That is accurate, but it is only half of the truth. And the half I didn't explain is exactly what the Spartan system was built on. Cortisol is not a single phenomenon. It is a stress response that functions completely differently depending on whether the stress is acute or chronic. Short-term fasting raises cortisol acutely. This is documented and not contested. The body responds to caloric restriction with a temporary cortisol spike as part of its mobilization response, the same class of response as intense exercise or cold exposure. This is acute cortisol, and acute cortisol does something entirely different from its chronic counterpart. It sharpens focus. It raises physical aggression. It increases output capacity. It is the body's ignition signal, the hormonal mechanism that activates peak performance mode in response to a stressor that demands a physical response. Combined with the norepinephrine elevation that fasting also produces, the Spartan who trained and competed in a fasted state was running on a biological performance state that cannot be replicated by a pre-workout supplement. The previous content on this channel addressed chronic cortisol, the unresolved, sustained elevation that modern men carry from constant stimulation, poor sleep, and stress that never fully ends. That content was accurate in the context it addressed. Chronic cortisol does exactly what I described. It slowly dismantles your testosterone, your body composition, and your recovery capacity. The Spartan pattern was structurally different. The fasting produced an acute cortisol spike every morning. That spike served its purpose. It powered the training, sharpened the mind, and primed the body. Then the structure of the day resolved it. Cortisol naturally follows a circadian rhythm, highest in the morning and falling through the day. The Spartan pattern of morning training, physical activity, and a single evening communal meal at the Sisisha aligned with this rhythm. The spike worked. The evening allowed it to fully collapse. And into that collapse, as the dual hormone hypothesis published in Hormones and Behavior in 2010 confirms, testosterone operates without interference. When cortisol is fully resolved, testosterone's effects on strength, recovery, and physical adaptation express themselves completely. The Spartans were not consciously engineering their hormonal cycles. They had no concept of cortisol or testosterone. But the daily pattern they built, morning fast, training, physical effort, evening meal, communal rest, was producing an optimal hormonal rhythm as a structural consequence of how they lived. The modern man's problem is not that he has cortisol, it is that he never resolves it. The stress never fully ends. The cortisol never fully drops. And testosterone never gets its window. That window is what the art of living like a man e-guide is built around. It's a daily framework for men who are done letting their hormones work against them and ready to structure their lives the way the Spartan pattern did. Link is in the description. Now, back to Thermopylae, where everything this video has described showed up together on the same morning. A scout sent by Xerxes returned from the Greek lines with a report. The Spartans, the 300 men standing between the Persian army and the rest of Greece, were combing their hair, like men with nowhere else to be. Xerxes summoned Demaratus, a former Spartan king living in exile at the Persian court, and demanded an explanation. Demaratus's answer is recorded by Herodotus. It is their custom, when they are about to risk their lives, to adorn their heads with care. Read through everything this video has covered. That image lands differently now. Those men were not calm because they were resigned to dying. They were calm because they were in the exact neurological state they had trained themselves into every single morning since age 7. Norepinephrine elevated, cortisol spiked and functional, metabolically flexible, hormonally primed, mentally sharpened by hunger. The fasted state they were in that morning was not special preparation for Thermopylae. It was a normal day for them. Herodotus documents the fighting that followed. The Spartans rotated in and out of the front line, maintaining fresh output against the Persian advance for hours. Xerxes sent his best infantry. Then, the Immortals, 10,000 elite soldiers, the finest in the Persian Empire. They were repelled repeatedly by men who had eaten one modest meal the night before. When Xerxes sent a written demand for the Spartans to lay down their weapons, Leonidas responded in 2 words. Plutarch records them. Come and take them. Plutarch also records a line attributed to Lycurgus, the lawgiver who designed the entire system. When asked why Spartan soldiers were given so little food, so that they may be accustomed to endure the want of it. The ancient way exists to recover what was lost. If this changes how you think about the next morning you train before eating, you already know what to do.